They say the first bond a mother has with her child is unbreakable. A 9-month-long secret conversation whispered through heartbeats and hope. I had that. I felt every flutter, every kick, every hiccup. I sang to him in the quiet of my small apartment, my hands resting on the swell of my belly, promising him a world of love and safety. The world his parents, my sister Serena and her husband Alistair Croft, would provide. I was just the vessel, the temporary home. I was the surrogate. At least, that's what they told me. That's what I believed. The lie was as elegant and expensive as everything else in their lives. And I, the ever-helpful, ever-trusting younger sister, bought it completely. It started, as it always did with Serena, with a phone call that sounded more like a royal summons than a request. She was crying, of course. Serena's tears were her primary currency, and she spent them lavishly. She and Alistair, the charismatic state senator with his sights set on the governor's mansion, had been trying for a baby for years. It was the one thing their vast fortune and political clout couldn't buy. Her voice was a fragile, carefully constructed web of sorrow. The doctors had told her, she whispered, that her body was simply inhospitable. A hostile environment, she'd said, a phrase that sounded both tragic and medically dramatic. She couldn't carry a child to term. Their dream of a Croft heir, the next link in their political dynasty, was fading. But then she'd paused, letting the silence hang heavy with manufactured suspense. There was another way, a way I could help, a way I could give them the one thing they wanted most in the world, me. I could carry their baby. They had a donor egg, a perfect genetic specimen from a woman who was a magna cum laude graduate from an Ivy League school with a passion for classical music. They had Alistair's contribution, of course. All they needed was a womb, my healthy, reliable, working-class womb. It was a business transaction dressed up in the language of sisterly love. I should have seen it for what it was right then. But I was Maya, good old Maya, the one who fixed things, the one who always showed up. My life was small and simple compared to theirs. I worked as a freelance graphic designer from my 2-bedroom apartment, raising my 8-year-old son, Noah, on my own. Their world was glittering fundraisers, motorcades, and houses with more rooms than I could count. Mine was PTA meetings, scraped knees, and the quiet hum of a computer late at night. Helping them felt important. It felt like the one thing I could do that truly mattered on their grand stage. The agreement they had their lawyers draft was thick and imposing. An ironclad non-disclosure agreement was a key part of it, Alistair had explained, his hand resting on my shoulder, in a gesture that was meant to be reassuring but felt proprietary. It was to protect the privacy of the child, he'd said, his voice smooth as polished marble, to prevent any confusion. The payment was presented as generous, but I knew even then it was the bare minimum they could get away with. It would cover my lost work time and medical expenses, with a little left over. It wasn't life-changing money, it was get-by money. But it wasn't about the money, I told myself. It was about family. That was my first mistake. It was never about family for them. It was about acquisition. The pregnancy was lonely. Serena, who had sworn she wanted to be involved in every moment, was conspicuously absent. She was too busy managing Alistair's campaign, attending galas, or jetting off to exclusive resorts to de-stress. The few times she did visit, she treated my growing belly like a Prada handbag she had on order, something to be admired from a distance but not touched. She'd look at it, a tight, proprietary smile on her face, and say things like, "He's going to have Alistair's strong jawline. I can just feel it." Never once did she ask how I was feeling. The morning sickness that left me drained, the backaches that kept me up at night, the sheer exhaustion, none of it registered. I was a service provider, and my discomfort was simply part of the overhead. The birth was clinical and cold. Alistair and Serena were there, dressed in designer scrubs, looking like they were on a very strange, very sterile photo op. The moment the baby, a perfect, beautiful boy they named Leo, was born, he was whisked away to Serena's arms. I held him for less than a minute. I remember the weight of him, the scent of his skin, the tiny, grasping reflex of his hand around my finger, and then he was gone. Serena looked at me, her eyes holding not gratitude, but a cool, dismissive finality. "Thank you, Maya," she said, her voice clipped. "The final payment will be transferred tomorrow. Our lawyer will be in touch to make sure all the paperwork is concluded." And just like that, the curtain fell. I was no longer needed. The show was over. The weeks that followed were a hollowed-out echo of what I thought motherhood was supposed to feel like. My body ached for a baby that wasn't mine. My arms felt empty. I tried to call Serena just to ask how Leo was, but my calls went to voicemail. My text went unanswered. Ifide end entry. Finally, a month after the birth, I received a certified letter. It was from their lawyer. It was a formal reminder of the NDA I had signed, accompanied by a thinly veiled threat. It mentioned my increasingly erratic communications and suggested that for my own emotional stability, all future contact should cease. Emotional instability. That was the knife, and they twisted it with brutal efficiency. They had what they wanted, and now they were painting me as the crazy, obsessed surrogate who couldn't let go. They were erasing me from the story, cutting me out of their perfect family portrait. They had bought a baby, and they were making sure the packaging was thrown away. I fell apart. For weeks, I was a ghost in my own apartment, shuffling between my bed and the living room sofa, my work piling up, my son Noah looking at me with worried eyes. The betrayal was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. They hadn't just taken a baby and cut me off. They had taken my sacrifice, my body, my love, and twisted it into a shameful, pathetic secret they needed to bury. It wasn't about revenge until it was. The moment I read the words emotional instability, something inside me shifted from grief to a cold, hard resolve. They had picked the wrong woman to silence. The silence from Serena and Alistair wasn't just silence, it was a statement. It was a heavy, impenetrable wall, built brick by brick. With their wealth and influence, every unanswered call, every ignored text was another brick. The final payment had arrived in my bank account as promised, a sterile, impersonal transaction that felt less like a thank you and more like a severance package. It was an amount that, to them, was probably the equivalent of a bar tab at one of their fundraisers. To me, it was just enough to create a buffer, but it was also an insult. It was the price tag they'd put on 9 months of my life, on the stretch marks that now mapped my stomach, on the phantom kicks I still sometimes felt in the dead of night. They thought the money and the NDA were a cage. They had no idea they were actually forging the key. My apartment, which had always been a cozy sanctuary for me and Noah, started to feel like a prison. The silence was deafening. I would find myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the phone, my thumb hovering over Serena's name, my heart pounding with a toxic mix of hope and rage. What would I even say? Please let me see the baby I carried. Please tell me he's okay. Please acknowledge that I am a human being, and not an incubator you rented. The humiliation was a constant, bitter taste in my mouth. My son Noah was my anchor in this storm. He was only 8, but he had the soul of an old, wise man. He would come and sit next to me on the sofa, not saying anything, just placing his small hand on my arm. He knew I was sad. He didn't know the whole story, of course. I had told him that Aunt Serena and Uncle Alistair had a baby, and that I had helped them. He didn't understand the transactional nature of it, the coldness. He just saw his mom, broken. One evening, he came to me with a drawing. It was of me, him, and a little baby in a crib. He'd labeled us our family. I burst into tears, a fresh wave of grief washing over me. This was the life they had denied me, denied Leo, the simple, uncomplicated love of a family. I needed to see the history of the betrayal, to understand it, so I could fight it. I started pulling out old photo albums, boxes of memories I hadn't looked at in years, and there it was, laid out in glossy 4x6 prints, the undeniable pattern of my life with Serena. Serena, the golden child, and me, the dependable shadow. There was Serena at her ballet recital, a perfect porcelain doll in a pink tutu, our parents beaming in the front row. I was in the background of the photo, half cut off, holding her water bottle and discarded leg warmers. There was Serena on her graduation day, from an expensive university our parents had mortgaged their future for, while I had gone to a state school and worked 2 jobs to graduate debt-free. In every picture, every memory, the dynamic was the same. She was the star, I was the stagehand. She was the one who had dreams. I was the one who was expected to be practical. When our mother got sick, it was me who moved back home for 6 months to take care of her. Serena visited twice, for a total of 4 hours, citing the pressures of her burgeoning social life. But when our mother passed, it was Serena who stood at the funeral and gave a beautiful, heart-wrenching eulogy about their profound bond, as if she'd been there every single day. She performed the role of the grieving daughter perfectly. It was always a performance. This surrogacy, I realized, was just the grand finale of a lifetime of me giving and her taking. She had never seen me as an equal, only as a resource. My reliability, my strength, my willingness to help, these weren't virtues in her eyes. They were exploitable assets. And Alistair, with his politician's nose for weakness, had seen it too. He wasn't just Serena's husband. He was her enabler, her co-conspirator. He had weaponized her entitlement, wrapping it in the respectable cloak of his ambition. A child wasn't just a dream for them. It was a political prop. The family values candidate needed a family to value. The breaking point, the real catalyst, came not from a place of anger, but from a place of love for the child I already had. Noah had been dealing with some persistent allergies, and his pediatrician suggested we do a full genetic panel to rule out any underlying immune conditions. In their chin, the takes of hand fighters. It was a routine, precautionary measure. A few weeks later, the doctor's office called me in to discuss the results. I went alone, expecting a simple conversation about dust mites and dairy sensitivities. The doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Evans, sat across from me, a file open on her desk. She assured me that Noah was perfectly healthy. The allergies were minor, but she said, her brow furrowed slightly, something unusual had come up in the screening. It's a genetic marker, she explained, pointing to a line of code on the report. It's called the MTHFR C677T variant. It's quite common, nothing to worry about, but it can affect how the body processes folate. The interesting thing is, Noah is homozygous for the variant, meaning he inherited a copy from both of his biological parents. I must have looked confused, I said, but that's impossible. His father, my ex-husband, was tested years ago for something else. He doesn't carry that marker, I know for a fact. Dr. Evans looked at the chart again, then at me. Well, she said gently, the results are quite clear. Noah inherited one copy from you, which we can see here, and he must have inherited the other from his biological father. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pricked at the base of my neck. I told her, my voice barely a whisper, that my ex-husband was his biological father. There was no one else. We had been married for 5 years before Noah was born. There was no question. Dr. Evans, sensing my distress, tried to be reassuring. Lab errors are rare, but not impossible, she said. But this test is over 99.9% accurate. Is there any possibility, any at all, that there could be a mistake about his paternity? My world tilted on its axis. No, I insisted. There was no mistake. But as I drove home, my mind was racing, spinning through a Rolodex of impossible scenarios. The doctor's words echoed in my head. Homozygous, inherited from both parents. I carried the marker. That meant Noah's father had to carry it too. My ex didn't. The logic was simple, brutal, and inescapable. I got home and pulled out my own medical file from the surrogacy. The fertility clinic had done a full workup on me, a requirement for the process. I scanned the pages, my hands shaking so badly I could barely read the words, and then I saw it. On the third page of my genetic screening report, listed under miscellaneous markers, MTHFR, C677T variant, positive, I had the marker. Then another memory surfaced, a piece of a conversation I had brushed aside at the time. It was during one of my early appointments at the fertility clinic, the one where they explained the whole process. I was with Alistair. Serena was, predictably, at a charity luncheon. The doctor was talking about the egg donor, the Ivy League prodigy. Alistair had made a joke. "Well, as long as the baby gets my brains and your good health," he'd said, gesturing vaguely at me. Then he'd added something that seemed odd. "I actually have that same folate thing my mother has, the MTHFR thing. The doctors say it's no big deal, but it's a Croft family trait, I guess." At the time I'd barely registered it. It was just Alistair filling the silence. But now, the words hit me like a physical blow. The Croft family trait. He had the marker. I sat on my floor, surrounded by medical papers, the pieces clicking into place, with a horrifying, sickening certainty. The clinic, the transfer procedure, the samples all lined up in a sterile lab. A mistake, a simple, catastrophic, human error. They weren't supposed to use my egg. They were supposed to use the donors. But what if they hadn't? What if, in that cold, impersonal laboratory, someone had mixed up the vials? What if the embryo they had implanted in me, the child I had carried and nurtured for 9 months, wasn't just grown in my body, but had come from it? The thought was so monumental, so reality-altering, that I felt the air leave my lungs. I scrambled for my phone and Googled the fertility clinic. It was a high-end, exclusive facility, the kind that catered to the wealthy and powerful, the kind of place where a senator's business would be a top priority, the kind of place where perhaps a mistake of this magnitude would be covered up at all costs. Leo, the baby boy I had held for only a minute, the nephew I thought I'd lost. He wasn't my nephew. If Alistair had the marker, and I had the marker, and they had used my egg by mistake, then Leo would have a 25% chance of being homozygous, just like Noah. But more importantly, a 100% chance of being my biological son. My son, and his father, was my brother-in-law, the politician who had helped write me out of the narrative, who had called me emotionally unstable. The full weight of it crashed down on me. This wasn't just a betrayal anymore. It wasn't just a cruel family drama. It was a lie of biological, fundamental proportions. They hadn't just stolen my sacrifice. They had stolen my son. The cold resolve that had been hardening inside me for weeks now flashed into a white-hot, diamond-hard fury. This was not a fight about visitation rights or hurt feelings. This was a fight for my child. The Croft political dynasty, with all its power and money and secrets, was a house of cards built on a foundation of lies, and I was about to become the storm that blew it all down. The revelation didn't just give me resolve, it gave me a terrifying, crystal-clear purpose. The grief and helplessness that had clouded my days evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp focus I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since Leo's birth, I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a mother on a mission. But I knew I couldn't storm the Croft fortress with nothing but a genetic theory and a mother's intuition. Alistair and Serena would shred me. They would use their army of lawyers and public relations experts to paint me as a delusional, grieving woman trying to extort a powerful family. They had already laid the groundwork by labeling me emotionally unstable. I had to be smarter. I had to be more strategic. I had to be flawless. My first step was to move from certainty to proof. A mother's instinct and a genetic marker from my other son weren't enough for a court of law. I needed direct, irrefutable evidence. I needed to know what happened inside that clinic. My mind immediately went to the staff. Someone there had to know something. A mistake of that magnitude, swapping a client's egg with a surrogate's, wouldn't go unnoticed. It would be a catastrophic breach of protocol. Someone would have realized it, and that person would either be part of a cover-up or living with a mountain of guilt. I was betting on the guilt. I remembered a nurse from my many visits. Her name was Sarah. She was younger, with kind eyes that always seemed a little sad. She wasn't as polished or brisk as the other staff. She had been the one who held my hand during the embryo transfer, the one who had whispered, "Good luck," with what felt like genuine warmth. She had also been the one who, a few weeks after the birth, had called me from a blocked number. At the time, I was so deep in my fog of despair that the conversation barely registered. She just asked if I was okay, her voice hushed and nervous. I had mumbled something non-committal, and she had quickly hung up. Now, that call seemed like a flare sent up in the dark. It was a cry of conscience. Finding her wasn't easy. I didn't know her last name. I spent 2 days scouring social media, searching for nurses who worked at the clinic, cross-referencing photos until I found her. Sarah Peterson. Her profile was private, but her profile picture showed the same kind, worried eyes I remembered. I didn't reach out online. That was too traceable. I found her address through a public records search, a small apartment complex across town, a world away from the manicured lawns of Serena and Alistair's neighborhood. I drove there and sat in my car for an hour, rehearsing what I would say. This was my first real move, and everything depended on it. When I finally knocked on her door, she opened it a crack, her face instantly pale with shock and fear when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, trying to close the door. I put my foot in the way, not aggressively, but firmly. "Sarah, please," I said, my voice low and steady. "I'm not here to cause trouble for you. I'm here because I think you know that a terrible mistake was made, and I just need you to help me make it right." Her eyes filled with tears. She pulled me inside, her whole body trembling. Her apartment was modest, filled with plants and books. It felt like a safe, normal place, a stark contrast to the sterile horror we were about to discuss. She confessed everything in a torrent of guilt-ridden words. It had been her, not intentionally, but it was her mistake. The day of my transfer had been chaos. The clinic was short-staffed, and a VIP client, a tech billionaire, had shown up unexpectedly, throwing the entire schedule into disarray. In the rush, in the flurry of moving vials from the cryo-freezer to the lab, she had grabbed the wrong cassette. She had taken the one labeled with my name, my eggs that had been retrieved and frozen as a standard backup precaution, instead of the one labeled donor 3B7. She didn't realize her mistake until later that day, when she was logging the samples and saw the unused donor cassette still in the freezer. By then, the procedure was done. The embryo was already inside me. Panic had set in. She had gone to her supervisor, Dr. Madsen, the head of the clinic, and Dr. Madsen, a man who prided himself on his clinic's flawless reputation and his close ties to powerful clients like Alistair Croft, had made a decision. They would bury it. He told Sarah that admitting the error would ruin them. It would mean lawsuits, the loss of their license, a public scandal. Alistair Croft was a rising star. He couldn't be touched by this kind of mess. Dr. Madsen had assured her that it was in a way a happy accident. The surrogate was healthy. The father was the same. The child would be healthy. No one needed to know. It was a victimless error, he'd argued. He promoted Sarah to a senior nursing position with a significant raise a week later. It was hush money, plain and simple. She had been living with the guilt ever since. That anonymous call to me had been her conscience screaming. Listening to her story, I didn't feel anger toward Sarah. I felt a strange kinship. She was a pawn, just like me, caught in the gears of a machine designed to protect the powerful. "I need proof, Sarah," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I need something concrete. A lab report, an inventory log, anything." She looked terrified. "They shredded everything," she whispered. "Dr. Madsen personally supervised the correction of the records. He created a false paper trail, showing the donor egg was used. Of course he did, but I had learned from living in Serena's shadow that people who are meticulous about covering their tracks often have a blind spot." "Think, Sarah," I urged. "Is there anything digital, an old server backup, an email you sent, anything they might have missed?" Her eyes widened. "The old system," she said, almost to herself. "They upgraded their entire record system about 6 months ago. The old server is probably still in a storage closet somewhere. They were supposed to have it professionally wiped, But with all the construction for the new wing, things got chaotic. It was a long shot, but it was the only one I had. Sarah, fueled by a desire to finally clear her conscience, agreed to help. It was a massive risk for her. If she got caught, she would lose her career and could even face legal action. But she looked at me, her eyes filled with a new determination. "What they did to you, what they made me a part of, it was wrong," she said. "That little boy deserves to know who his mother is." While Sarah was my inside source, I needed an outside weapon. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a shark. I spent the next week researching. I didn't look for the big, flashy law firms that Alistair would have on retainer. I looked for the opposite. I looked for a legal pit bull, someone who took on impossible cases and loved fighting City Hall. I found him in a small, unassuming office above a bookstore. His name was Marcus Thorne. He was a former prosecutor with a reputation for being a brilliant, tenacious, and utterly ruthless litigator who now specialized in high-conflict family law and medical malpractice. His website was bare bones. His photo was 10 years old, but his list of case victories against powerful corporations and corrupt institutions was staggering. He was perfect. I walked into his office with a single folder. In it was Noah's genetic report, my own medical file, my surrogacy agreement, and the threatening letter from Alistair's lawyer. I sat across from him, a man with tired eyes and a mind that seemed to be moving at 100 miles an hour, and I told him everything. From Serena's first tearful phone call to my conversation with Sarah, I didn't cry. I didn't get emotional. I laid out the facts, one by one, like a detective presenting evidence. When I finished, he was silent for a full minute, leaning back in his creaky leather chair, steepling his fingers. I could see him connecting the dots, assessing the risks, calculating the odds. Finally, he leaned forward. "They didn't call you emotionally unstable because you were," he said, his voice a low gravel. "They called you that to preemptively discredit you. It's a classic move for powerful people who have something to hide. They build the narrative first. It tells me they're scared. Or at least they were scared you'd figure it out." He looked at me, a flicker of something that looked like respect in his eyes. "This is not a custody case, Maya. Not yet. This is a grenade. The question is not if we pull the pin, but how and when. A messy public battle will hurt the child. A quiet, surgical strike will bring them to their knees." He laid out the strategy. Our first move would not be to go to the press. It would be to get the one thing we needed to make the entire case airtight, a DNA sample from Leo, and the one thing that could force that was a court order. A few nights later, Sarah called me, her voice trembling with excitement. She had done it. Working a late shift, she had found the old server in a dusty back room, just as she'd thought. It was still plugged in, but not connected to the network. She had managed to boot it up and access the old record system, and there it was, the original, unaltered transfer log from that day. It clearly showed the chain of custody. Egg vial, M4781. My vial had been signed out to my transfer room. Donor vial, D3B7, was still listed as being in cryo storage. She had taken a picture of the screen with her phone. The image was grainy, time-stamped, and utterly damning. It was the first real piece of our arsenal. I now had a secret ally, a powerful lawyer, and a photograph of the truth. The pieces were in place. The silent rage that had been simmering inside me had cooled into a patient, calculating resolve. Serena and Alistair thought they had buried their secret under a mountain of money, legal threats, and lies. They thought they had silenced me, but they had miscalculated. They assumed I was the same weak, accommodating Maya I had always been. They had no idea that in trying to erase me, they had given me a reason to fight back with a strength I never knew I possessed. The plan was no longer a secret in my head. It was a living, breathing thing, and it was about to begin. The first move had to be silent, precise, and aimed directly at the heart of their power structure. Marcus was adamant about this. A public accusation would be a mudslinging contest, a he-said, she-said battle, that Alistair's PR team would spin into a story of a scorned, mentally unwell woman. We couldn't fight them on that battlefield. We had to create a new one, a private arena where their power and influence were useless, where the only thing that mattered was cold, hard, biological fact. Our weapon of choice was not a press release, but a single, legally terrifying document, a petition to establish parentage and for court-ordered genetic testing. Marcus drafted it with the precision of a surgeon. It was dry, clinical, and devastating. It didn't mention my surrogacy for Serena. It didn't mention my suspicions about the clinic. It simply stated, under penalty of perjury, that I had reason to believe I was the biological mother of the minor child, Leo Croft, and that Alistair Croft was the biological father. It formally requested that the court compel both Alistair and the child to submit to DNA testing to confirm or deny this claim. The beauty of it, Marcus explained, was its simplicity. It sidestepped the entire surrogacy narrative and went straight for the jugular. To a judge, it would look like a standard, if unusual, paternity claim. To Alistair, it would look like a ticking time bomb. The next step was delivery. We couldn't just mail it. We needed to ensure it landed with maximum impact and minimum warning. Marcus hired a specialized process server, a man who looked less like a legal functionary and more like a retired spy. His instructions were specific. The petition was to be delivered not to the Croft family home, not to Alistair's public-facing Senate office, but to the private, unmarked office of his chief of staff, a man named Gregory Finch. Finch was Alistair's gatekeeper, his fixer, the man who knew where all the bodies were buried. Serving him was a direct message: we know, and we are not playing by your rules. The server delivered the papers on a Tuesday morning. I spent the day in a state of suspended animation, my stomach churning, my phone clutched in my hand. I tried to work on a design project, but the colors on the screen blurred together. Every nerve in my body was coiled tight, waiting for the explosion. It came at 4:17 p.m. My phone rang, and the caller ID was a blocked number. I answered, my heart hammering against my ribs. Maya. It was Alistair. His voice, usually so smooth and resonant, the voice that swayed voters and charmed donors, was thin and brittle, stretched taut with a panic he couldn't conceal. What is this? What in God's name is this legal nonsense you've sent to my office? I took a deep breath, picturing Marcus's face, hearing his advice. Let him talk. Don't defend, don't explain, just state your position. It's a petition, Alistair, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. It's a request for a DNA test. There was a sharp, frustrated sound on the other end of the line, like he had slammed his hand on a desk. A DNA test? Are you insane? We have a contract, Maya. We have a non-disclosure agreement that you signed. I will have my lawyers bury you in litigation until you can't even afford to buy groceries. You are playing with fire. This was the moment, the threat. It was exactly what Marcus had predicted. The NDA covers the surrogacy arrangement, Alistair, I said, repeating the lines Marcus and I had rehearsed. It does not, and cannot, legally terminate my fundamental parental rights to my biological child. The contract is void. It was predicated on a fraud. The word fraud hung in the air between us. I heard a sharp intake of breath. He was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. The politician's mind trying to calculate the angles, to find an escape route, but there wasn't one. This is blackmail, he finally hissed. You're trying to extort us. No, I said, my voice unwavering. I am trying to confirm the identity of my son. The court will decide. Just agree to the test, Alistair. If I'm wrong, you'll never hear from me again. If I'm right, we'll have another conversation. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but a surge of adrenaline, of power washed through me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one reacting to their world. They were reacting to mine. Less than an hour later, Serena called. This time there were no tears. Her voice was pure ice, a venomous whisper. You ungrateful little witch, she began, dispensing with any pretense of sisterly affection. After everything we did for you, we gave you a purpose. We paid you. And this is how you repay us. by trying to destroy our family with these insane delusional fantasies. She went on, a tirade about my jealousy, my instability, how I was clearly having a mental breakdown because I couldn't handle the emotional toll of the surrogacy. It was the exact narrative they had planned to use, and she was delivering it with theatrical fury. I let her exhaust herself. When she finally paused to take a breath, I said one simple sentence. Ask Alistair about the MTHFR gene variant. Serena. Silence. Complete and utter silence on the other end of the line. I had just thrown a word into the conversation that did not belong. It was a piece of information I should not have had. It was the secret key to the whole conspiracy, and I had just shown her I was holding it. What did you say? She whispered. The venom gone, replaced by a dawning, horrified confusion. Talk to your husband, I said, and I hung up. The panic in the Croft household must have been stratospheric. Marcus had a contact in the local political press, a seasoned reporter named David Chen, who owed him a favor. Marcus didn't leak the story. He did something far more subtle. He called David and, off the record, asked a hypothetical question. What would happen to a family values politician's career if it turned out his child was conceived in a fraudulent surrogacy arrangement, where the surrogate was, in fact, the biological mother? It was just enough. David, smelling the scent of a major scandal, started making quiet, informal inquiries. He started calling Alistair's donors, his political allies, asking vague questions about the Croft family, about the new baby. He wasn't reporting a story yet. He was just shaking the tree to see what would fall out. The effect was immediate. The wealthy and powerful hate two things: losing money and public scandal. The first whispers of a potential family issue were enough to make them nervous. A major donor for Alistair's gubernatorial campaign suddenly postponed a $1,000 a plate dinner. A key endorsement from a veteran party statesman was delayed pending further review. No one knew the specifics, but the stench of a problem was in the air. Alistair's perfectly curated world was starting to fray at the edges, not from a public explosion, but from a series of quiet, targeted whispers. They were trapped. If they fought the petition in court, it would become public record. The media would swarm. If they ignored it, a judge would issue a default judgment in my favor. Their only move was to try to control the damage, to silence me before the whispers became a roar. But they had no idea that I was no longer interested in being silent. Their panic was the overture to my symphony, and the main performance was about to begin. The initial panic from Alistair and Serena quickly curdled into a more focused, more desperate form of attack. They realized that direct threats and angry phone calls weren't working. I wasn't backing down. So they shifted tactics. They moved from trying to intimidate me to trying to utterly destroy my credibility before the truth could ever see the light of day. This was the family exodus I had anticipated, but not in the way one might think. It wasn't my family leaving me. I was already in exile. It was Alistair's political family, his network of allies, donors, and media contacts, that he now mobilized against me. He was trying to force an exodus of my support, my sanity, and my reputation. It started with a leak, not the real story, of course, but a twisted, malicious version of it. A popular local political blog, one known for its right-leaning gossip and aggressive takedowns, suddenly ran a blind item. It spoke of a prominent state politician and his wife being harassed by a disturbed former associate. It painted a picture of a woman suffering from a severe psychological breakdown who had developed an obsessive fixation on the couple's new baby. The language was carefully chosen, unstable, delusional, erratic. It was the exact narrative they had tried to build from the beginning, now laundered through a seemingly objective third party. They were trying to poison the well, to ensure that if my name ever became public, it would already be associated with mental illness. The next salvo came from my own family, or what was left of it. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, called me. She had always been closer to Serena, always dazzled by her glamorous life. Her voice was dripping with a kind of pitying condescension that was far more insulting than Serena's open rage. Maya, honey, she started. Serena called me. She is so worried about you. Alistair is a very important man, and you're making these accusations. Are you sure you're feeling all right? Maybe you should talk to someone. This kind of stress, after what your body has been through, it can do strange things to a person's mind. They were using her as a proxy, turning my own family against me with their carefully crafted lies. It was a classic manipulation tactic. Isolate the target and make them believe they are the ones who are crazy. It was infuriating, but it was also a sign of their desperation. They wouldn't be working this hard to discredit me if they weren't terrified of the truth. But their most desperate counter-manipulation was aimed directly at my greatest vulnerability, my son Noah. One afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up outside my apartment building. A woman in a sharp business suit, carrying a leather briefcase, knocked on my door. She introduced herself as a representative from a newly formed child advocacy group I had never heard of. She said they had received an anonymous tip expressing concern for the welfare of my son Noah. The tip, she explained, suggested that I was emotionally distressed and creating an unstable home environment. The implication was clear, chilling, and utterly vile. They were threatening to use Child Protective Services as a weapon against me. They were willing to traumatize my child to silence me about theirs. That was the moment the last shred of my hesitation burned away. This was no longer just a fight for Leo. It was a fight to protect Noah from the toxic fallout of their corruption. I looked the woman in the eye, my voice as cold as ice. "This meeting is over," I said. "You can direct any future communications to my lawyer, Marcus Thorne. His number is on the door. If you or anyone associated with you comes near my son again, I will consider it harassment and file for a restraining order against you, your organization, and your anonymous source, whom we all know as Alistair Croft." I closed the door in her stunned face. I immediately called Marcus, my hands trembling with rage. He was furious. "This is the move of a cornered animal, Maya," he said. "It's sloppy, it's reckless, and it's going to backfire on them spectacularly. They just handed us a gift." He explained that using a threat of a CPS investigation as leverage in a legal dispute was a serious abuse of process. It demonstrated malice. It was evidence. While their plan was to isolate and terrify me, they had actually just handed me more ammunition. They were so blinded by their own power and privilege that they couldn't see how their actions would look to an impartial observer, to a judge. They believed their own narrative, that they were the victims, and I was the aggressor. The power was shifting, and they could feel it, which only made them more frantic. The quiet whispers from the press were getting louder. The postponed fundraiser was now officially canceled, the donor citing scheduling conflicts. Alistair was forced to answer a question from a reporter at a press conference about rumors of legal troubles, which he awkwardly deflected, looking flustered and unprepared. The mask of the calm, confident leader was slipping. Behind the scenes, Marcus was turning the screws. He filed a motion for sanctions against Alistair for the CPS threat, attaching a sworn affidavit from me detailing the visit. He sent a cease and desist letter to the political blog, warning them of a libel suit. The legal web was closing in around them, and it was a web of their own making. The final, desperate act of manipulation came from Serena. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, the first time she had been there in over a year. She looked haggard, the polished veneer cracked. She didn't try to yell, she tried to cry. The famous Serena tears. "Maya, please," she sobbed, standing in my doorway. "You're tearing our family apart. You're destroying Alistair. You're going to ruin this baby's life before it even begins. Is that what you want? Is your jealousy, your resentment, so great that you would sacrifice an innocent child's future just to hurt me?" She tried to bargain. She offered me money, a lot of it. "Name a price, Maya, anything. We'll set up a trust fund for Noah. We'll buy you a house. Just sign the papers, drop this insane lawsuit and go away." It was all there. The performance, the guilt-tripping, the transactional nature of their worldview. Everything could be bought. Everyone had a price. I looked at my sister, at this woman who shared my blood, but not an ounce of my heart, and I felt nothing but a profound, empty pity. "It was never about the money, Serena," I said, my voice quiet. You made it about the money. You made it about contracts and NDAs and payments. But for me, it was about a promise I made to a child. And now, it's about a mother's right. You can't buy that. You can't threaten it away. You can't spin it into a lie. I told her to leave. I told her the next time I would see her would be in a courtroom or a lawyer's office. As she walked away, defeated, I knew the power had completely shifted. They were out of moves. They had tried to manipulate, to threaten, to buy me off, and every single attempt had failed. All that was left was the truth, and the truth was coming. The confrontation, when it finally happened, was not the screaming match I had once imagined. It was something far colder, far more final. It took place in a sterile, soulless conference room at Marcus Thorne's law firm. The air was thick with the scent of expensive leather and unspoken animosity. On one side of the vast mahogany table sat Serena and Alistair, flanked by a team of 3 grim-faced lawyers who looked like they were attending a funeral. Serena was pale, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. Alistair looked like a ghost. The charismatic politician was gone, replaced by a gray, shrunken man, his power suit hanging loosely on his frame. The scandal had bled him dry. On the other side of the table, it was just me and Marcus. I wore a simple black dress, my hair pulled back. I felt a strange, unnerving calm. The storm inside me had passed, leaving behind a quiet, resolute certainty. Between us on the table lay a single, sealed manila envelope. It was the reason we were all there. After weeks of legal maneuvering, Alistair had finally been forced to submit to the court-ordered DNA test. He had tried to delay, to appeal, to bury us in motions, but Marcus had countered every move. The judge, irritated by Alistair's obvious stonewalling and alarmed by the motion for sanctions regarding the CPS threat, had finally lost patience and compelled the test with a strict deadline. The results had arrived that morning. Marcus began, his voice calm and even. We are here today to discuss the results of the court-ordered paternity and maternity test for the minor child, Leo Croft. He slid the envelope to the center of the table. But before we open this, I want to make our position perfectly clear. He looked directly at Alistair. My client, Maya, is not seeking to destroy your career, Senator. She is not seeking financial restitution beyond standard child support. She is seeking one thing, and one thing only: the legal and physical custody of her biological son. Alistair's lead lawyer, a portly man named Sullivan, scoffed. This is an outrageous and baseless claim, predicated on a wild conspiracy theory. My clients graciously allowed Miss. Don't. Marcus cut him off, his voice dropping an octave, losing its calm, and gaining a sharp, dangerous edge. Don't you dare try to spin a narrative in this room. We are past that. The time for PR and political maneuvering is over. This room is about facts. He picked up the envelope, tore open the seal, and pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. He scanned it for a moment, his expression unreadable, then placed it on the table, facing them. The silence that followed was absolute. I watched Serena's eyes scan the page. I saw her go rigid, her hand flying to her mouth. Alistair just stared at it, his face crumbling. I didn't need to read it. I already knew what it said. Probability of maternity: Maya Austin, 99.999%. Probability of paternity: Alistair Croft, 99.999%. It was there, in black and white. The biological truth, the end of their lie. Now, Marcus said into the suffocating silence, we can discuss the new reality. He laid out our terms, a full confession to the fertility clinic board, implicating Dr. Madsen and triggering a full investigation, a public statement, drafted by us, correcting the record. It would not mention the clinic's error to protect Sarah, but it would state that new information had revealed I was Leo's biological mother, and that Serena and Alistair would be supporting me as I assumed my parental rights. It was a statement designed to salvage a shred of dignity for them while giving me everything I needed. And finally, a custody agreement granting me sole legal and physical custody of Leo. They would have supervised visitation at my discretion. Sullivan started to bluster. This is unacceptable. We will fight this. My client, fight it with what? I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. Both Serena and Alistair flinched, looking at me as if they were seeing me for the first time. What will you fight it with? This. I tapped the DNA report. You can drag this through the courts. It will become a public circus. Every news outlet in the country will pick it up. The story of the rising political star, the family values candidate who conspired with a fertility clinic to defraud his sister-in-law and steal her biological child. How do you think that plays out for your gubernatorial run, Alistair? How does that play out for your reputation, Serena? Serena finally broke. A raw, guttural sob tore from her throat. He was supposed to be mine, she wailed, looking at me with eyes full of a lifetime of jealousy and entitlement. You have Noah. You have everything so easy. For once I was supposed to have the one thing I wanted. He was supposed to be mine. The sheer, breathtaking selfishness of her statement left me momentarily speechless. Even now, faced with the undeniable truth, she still saw Leo as a possession she had been cheated out of. She saw me not as a mother who had found her son, but as a rival who had stolen her prize. He is not a thing, Serena, I said, my voice shaking with a fury I could no longer contain. He is a person. He is my son. You didn't want a child. You wanted an accessory. You wanted an heir to a dynasty built on lies. And you were willing to destroy my life, my reputation, and my family to get it. I stood up. The meeting was over. Marcus has the papers, I said, looking at Alistair. Sign them. It's the only way out of this that doesn't end in complete and utter ruin for you. This is the last bit of grace you will ever get from me. I walked out of that conference room without looking back. I didn't need to see them sign the papers. Their capitulation was inevitable. I had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a rescue mission. I had walked through fire, not for revenge but to pull my son back from the wreckage of their lives. The new reality wasn't just theirs. It was mine too, and it was just beginning. The aftermath was not a loud explosion, but a quiet, seismic shift that reordered our entire world. Alistair and Serena, stripped of their power and their lies, capitulated completely. They signed everything. The public statement they released was a masterpiece of curated humility, admitting to a profound and unexpected private family matter, and asking for privacy as they supported Maya in her new role. It was just enough to avoid complete immolation, but the political damage was done. The whispers became a roar of speculation. Alistair withdrew from the governor's race 2 weeks later, citing personal family reasons. His political dynasty, built on a carefully constructed image of integrity, crumbled overnight. He and Serena became social phantoms, retreating into the gilded cage of their mansion, their public life over. The price of their lie was their world. The price of my fight was my past. I lost a sister, but I gained a son. The first time I held Leo as my own, truly my own, was in the quiet of my own apartment. Marcus had arranged the transfer. There was no ceremony, just a nanny bringing him to my door in his car seat. When she left, it was just me, Noah, and this tiny, perfect little boy. I lifted him into my arms, and this time, no one was there to take him away. He looked at me with wide, curious eyes, and I saw my own eyes staring back. I saw the curve of my father's brow. He was a piece of me, a piece of my history, that had been lost and was now found. Noah, who had only known this baby as a distant cousin, came and gently touched his cheek. "He's our baby now, Mom?" he asked, his voice soft. "Yes, honey," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "He's our baby. He's your brother." We settled into a new kind of normal, a chaotic, beautiful, exhausting normal. There were midnight feedings and diaper changes, Noah reading picture books to a gurgling Leo, the sound of 2 children filling the rooms that had once felt so empty and silent. I had to learn to be a mother to an infant again, but every moment, even the frustrating ones, was a gift. It was a reclamation. I was not just Maya, the graphic designer, the reliable sister, the surrogate. I was Maya, mother of 2. my sons. It was the most powerful, most authentic title I had ever held. Sarah, the nurse from the clinic, resigned her position. The clinic launched an internal investigation after receiving the anonymous confession from Alistair's lawyers. Dr. Madsen was fired, and the clinic was placed under review by the state medical board. Sarah sent me a simple one-line email. Thank you. She was free of her burden, just as I was free of mine. We were two women who had been caught in the same storm, and we had found our own way out. People often ask me if I regret it, if I hate my sister. It's a complicated question. I don't feel hate anymore. Hate is a hot, consuming emotion, and what I feel for Serena now is a cold, vast distance. I mourn the sister I thought I had, the idea of family I once cherished. Family is supposed to be your safe harbor, not the storm you have to survive. My family now is the one I have built, the one I protect. It's me, Noah, and Leo, a little unit forged in truth and resilience. It wasn't about revenge, not in the end. It was about restoration. It was about bringing a child home to his real family, to a place where he would be loved for who he is, not for what he represents. And that's my story. It's a story about the lies we tell ourselves and the truths that refuse to be buried. It's about the difference between a house and a home, between a contract and a family. They tried to buy a child and silence a mother, but they forgot that the one thing money can never buy, and power can never overcome, is the truth. So now, I want to turn it over to you. What would you have done in my shoes? When you found out the truth, would you have gone public immediately, or would you have played the long game like I did? And the big question, should I ever let Serena and Alistair have a real relationship with Leo? They are still his relatives, but after everything they did, can they ever be trusted? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and if you've been through a family betrayal that made you question everything you thought you knew, I want you to know you're not alone. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more stories about fighting for the truth, because sometimes the only way to find your future is to blow up your past. Thank you for listening.